So Joe Rogan on one of his podcasts, I think it was last week with was it Eric Weinstein? Yeah, the Theo Capital managing director. He was on there, and they were talking about the 2020 presidential election. And I should say Joe Rogan, said that he would vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden in a general election. And I think that's, probably a similar response to a lot of more independent or moderate voters will have when they're given the choice between Joe Biden and, Donald Trump. And it should be pointed out that before this, before it looked like, Joe Biden's basically the presumptive nominee, even though he's, MIA during this pandemic, Joe Rogan was a pretty strong supporter of Bernie Sanders. And basically, he had him on his podcast and just really seemed to like Bernie Sanders as a person, as well as believes in things like, universal health care and a living wage and, protecting the environment. All of these things he agrees with Bernie Sanders on, but he just doesn't think that Joe Biden is fit to govern right now. And if you look at, any of Joe Biden's recent interviews or press, or just when he tries to make these videos and put them out online, and where he's like walking off camera, even though he has like an earpiece in, he still, can't get through, a few minutes of just without completely putting his foot in his mouth. And so, it's pretty understandable that, voters, including Joe Rogan, have some real misgivings about how Joe Biden would handle, a current crisis like we're experiencing a pandemic. So this is a quote from Joe Rogan on why he couldn't vote for Joe Biden. Quote, "I can't vote for that guy. I'd rather vote for Trump than Biden. I don't think he can handle anything. You're relying entirely on his cabinet. If you want to talk about an individual leader who can communicate, he can't do that. And we don't know what the fuck he'll be like after a year in the office." Pretty common sense explanation for why Joe Rogan, would support Donald Trump over Joe Biden. He definitely, obviously can't communicate very well. That's definitely true. We don't know what Joe Biden will be like a year into his presidency. He can't even, come out with any type of adequate response during a pandemic as a candidate. How can we expect him to handle that as a fucking president, as the, quote, leader of the free world, even though that's, a crock of shit, because, the U.S. incarcerates more people than anywhere in the world. But I digress. And I agree. I don't think Joe Biden could handle anything, and he'd have to be relying on his cabinet. And he's, things have already been leaked to the press that, it'd be filled with, Wall Street cronies, probably heads of insurance companies, pharmaceutical industry, things like that. And obviously, not to say I personally would never vote for Donald Trump. I live in a very democratic state that will, go to whoever the Democratic nominee is, barring some, really transformative type of change happening here in Washington State. So I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. I'm not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm going to vote, third party, most likely Green. And then, so this is another quote from Rogan. Quote, "The pressure of being president of the United States is something that no one has ever prepared for. The only one who seems to be fine with it is Trump, oddly enough. He doesn't seem to be aging at all or in any sort of decline. Obama almost immediately started looking older. George W. Bush almost immediately started looking older." And then, the Democratic establishment, the liberal elites, both within media and, in Congress, or just in government in general, have been very unwilling to call out Joe Biden's very obvious, very severe, and very sad cognitive decline that he has been experiencing right in front of our eyes. And to the everyday average person, they can see that. And that's, what part of what Joe Rogan is pointing out right now about Biden. He can't communicate. He's not fit for the task of being president. He's not fit for the task of even running for president in a primary election. I mean, again, Hayden Biden, where are you? Anytime we see you or you make any type of appearance, you're more than likely to make, just multiple, just crazy, ridiculous statements that make no sense at all, I should say. And again, it's a false choice because Bernie Sanders is actually the candidate who in a general election will get the moderate and independent vote. Joe Biden's not going to get that. That's going to go to Donald Trump. Joe Rogan is a prime example of that. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter. He would have voted for Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump in the general election. This is again, this pandemic and the subsequent economic crash have increased, Biden's potential likelihood of defeating Trump, but it's still, going to be a huge task to defeat Trump, and he's not up for it physically. He doesn't have the type of platform or message that's going to excite people. Joe Biden, as a Democratic nominee, is going to suppress the vote. He doesn't give anybody anything to really vote for. What are his core messages? What is his core policy platform that he's running on? He doesn't have that. It's, a return to normalcy, bringing back some sanity to the government. That doesn't excite people. Again, Trump is a symptom of the problem. The failures of the Obama administration, as well as, previous, administrations, including Bush, the Clinton years, the Reagan years, George Bush Sr.'s term as president, and just the further neoliberalization, privatization, increasing wealth and income inequality, our racist criminal justice system, etc., have created the conditions that led to Donald Trump's rise. Things like NAFTA and the outsourcing of all these jobs and the destruction of good paying manufacturing jobs in the Rust Belt in the states that Trump won in 2016. Biden supported NAFTA. Biden supported the Iraq War. Biden wanted to cut Social Security multiple times as a senator. He now has that sexual assault allegation, which seems very credible, by former staffer Tara Reade against Biden. The cognitive decline, the corruption issues. But again, that's not a choice that we need to be making. But given how the establishment coalesced around Biden, with Buttigieg and Klobuchar and O'Rourke and Bloomberg and all those other sellout politicians who only care about advancing their own interests, even though if it's to the detriment of the people in the United States. They all jumped on the Biden train, as well as, all of the, media attention after Super Tuesday, etc. And so now we are in that place where, we very well could have had a Bernie Sanders presidency. Now, again, there have been some serious failings, from my perspective, from Bernie and his team, not willing to, switch around the messaging at all, not willing to attack Joe Biden, which is on Bernie because his team, including his campaign manager, had wanted him to go after, Biden, call him out on his record, call him out on his corruption, all these things. Bernie wasn't willing to go there because he thinks Joe Biden's a nice guy. So there's been, plenty of blame to go around. But again, we are in this crazy position right now where, again, people are being told to pick between the lesser of two evils. And it doesn't bode well for a Biden presidency, in my opinion. And I think even with the pandemic and the economic crisis, it's still going to be very difficult if Joe Biden is the nominee, and all signs point to him being that. It's going to be really hard for him to defeat Donald Trump. And I mean, I again, I would never vote for Donald Trump because he's horribly racist and xenophobic, and all of his policies disproportionately positive impact the wealthy, in the top 0.1%, as well as the corporations, and the horrible deregulation of the environment, and all the sexism, and misogyny, all of those things. So I could never vote for him, but I understand why some people feel like they would vote for him over Donald Trump. So kind of interesting. And then we have the some sections of the liberal media, at least, or just libs in general on Twitter or different forms of social media, really just hammering away at Joe Rogan for this, and saying, Bernie needs to disown Rogan, and, why do you want him in your tent? It's like, do you not see what the issue is here? Joe Biden is not going to convince people who may support Donald Trump to vote for him. Bernie Sanders is able to convince those independents, those moderates, to support him over Donald Trump. Don't you think that's kind of important? Don't you think that's kind of an issue that Joe Biden isn't able to do that? Your supposed nominee who's running as the electability candidate, when in fact he's anything but. So, I mean, interesting. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Peace. Love.